It's the TMZ Behind the Bar podcast with the TMZ lawyers, Jason Beckerman and Derek Kaufman.
Welcome to the podcast, everybody. We are once again proud to be sponsored by ZipRecruiter.com, where employers can post job openings to over 200 job sites, including social media sites like Facebook and Twitter, with one click of the mouse.
Yeah, so go to ZipRecruiter.com/TMZ and try it out for free.
So once again, thanks for...
Whoa, welcome back.
Thank you very much.
Okay, I don't want you to just dive in.
Derek, you are a good friend.
Yeah, Jason was gone on a do-gooding venture. He spent a week in Haiti digging ditches, septic tanks, and the like, right?
Yep, I did.
And he's back, not a scratch on you?
I was doing things there that I was totally unqualified to do, so why break a good thing? And let's continue on with the podcast.
Let's get back to the important stuff, which is
Right.
Kim Kardashian and Bieber related.
Right.
But anyway, welcome back.
But I wanted to thank everyone for tuning in to the podcast. The numbers have been sensational. If you're watching this on YouTube, it'd be great. Pull out your phones, go to your podcast store, type in TMZ Behind the Bar, and click on the subscribe button. It helps a ton. Earlier this week, Derek, your life was consumed. I was out of town mostly,
Yes.
but with the release of the Snoop Dogg video for the song Lavender.
That's right. Good to see Snoop back in the news. It's been too long.
It's been too long.
My youth, Snoop was such a big deal, and now he's back in full force.
I was about to say this is not how he wants to be in the news, but it's exactly how he wants to be in the news, because he put out a video in which there's a demonstration, a gentleman dressed up as Donald Trump wearing a clown mask, and Snoop puts a gun to his head, pulls the trigger in a flag, like the old,
old
cartoon
classic
style,
bang.
the old Wile E. Coyote thing. The little flag comes out and says bang, but it's clearly, it's not, I was going to say an illusion, but it's an actual demonstration of assassination of the President of the United States. This has obviously caused a furor. The public is divided. Senators we've gotten on TMZ, have Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz, outraged that Snoop Dogg would engage in this kind of conduct. The Secret Service is now involved. In fact, we're going to talk to an expert about what the Secret Service is going to do about this, and it's going to be more than just a phone call. But Derek, it begs the question, did Snoop Dogg do anything wrong? Again, he pulled out, in a music video, pulls out presumably a fake gun, points it at the head of somebody dressed up as the president, and pulls the trigger. Did he do anything wrong?
Did he do anything wrong? That's the million-dollar question. I think you can say he did something wrong, but he didn't do anything illegal, at least in my mind. So this is a classic problem. This isn't the first time someone has tried to insinuate in an artistic way that they'd like to assassinate the president. This has gone back to times of kings. People thought about killing the king. Regicide was a big thing. There's a specific crime.
Regicide was a big thing.
Regicide was a big thing back then. Actually, I looked this up. There was something called the English Treason Act of 1351 when regicide was all the rage.
Yeah.
Back in the sort of
This is during the Crusades.
This is during the
Post-Crusades,
Crusades.
Black Death time, yeah.
It was a crime, Jason, to, quote, compass or imagine killing the king.
No.
So it was a thought crime. Just even entertaining the thought. If they knew that you thought about the king and wished ill upon his family just in your head, didn't actually want to go through with anything, that's a crime in and of itself. Here, it's not so much a crime. Here, there's a specific crime for threatening the president.
Yeah.
But what Snoop did was artistic, right? This is a music video. He's dressing him up like a clown. This is a political statement, isn't it?
It really is. And because we are so First Amendment heavy, we protect our rights so dearly in this country. This idea of what constitutes a threat, and there's all sorts of law about this, because not only threatening the president is a crime, threatening anyone with bodily harm can be a crime.
Absolutely.
But it has to be, I know this from working at TMZ, and we've done these kinds of stories before where people have been accused of threatening to hurt someone. It's got to be a very specific articulation, not just of the desire to commit this, to harm somebody, but you actually have to threaten that you are going to engage in the act.
That's right. We've got to separate political statements from knowing threats. So there's a law about this. There's a law. It's a felony to threaten the president's life. Okay. So it's 18 U.S.C. 871 says it is a crime, a felony, to knowingly mail or otherwise threaten to kill, kidnap, or harm the president of the United States. So there's a law out there. You can do up to 5 years. Sometimes it can get extended to 10 if it's a certain type of public official.
Yeah.
But the Secret Service takes this very seriously. They investigate these matters seriously, and it happens all the time. What I was amazed at is the threats against presidents are all the time going on. Apparently, Obama received around 12,000 threats per year.
Right.
That's amazing. That's incredible. He's in office for 8 years, and there were 12,000 a year of threats against his life. You don't hear about all of them.
No, you do hear about some of them, though,
Yeah.
and some of them are veiled threats of the kind that we're seeing, like Snoop Dogg's, right? We did see President Obama being burned in effigy a number of times, obviously depictions of President Obama
That's right.
being burned in effigy a number of times. There were a lot of incredibly vicious, racist comments and threats made against the president's
And
life.
it was also heavily racially laden. When
Yeah.
burning an effigy is a classic way to protest any
Right.
political figure, but when you sort of lynch our first black president,
Right.
it seems worse, doesn't
Right,
it?
it does. Then
Yeah.
like fake shooting our first orange president. So not quite the same thing.
Exactly. But one of the most interesting ones, because I wanted to go back to how this law has sort of evolved, is there was a man who was convicted under this law for threatening to kill President Wilson. So Woodrow Wilson was one of the most famous ones. And here's what he said, because I think the words are important. I want to hear your thoughts on whether this would hold muster today. What he said was, President Wilson ought to be killed. If I had an opportunity, I would do it myself. Wilson is a wooden-headed son of a bitch. So good and old-timey in the 1910s. And he said, I wish Wilson was in hell, and if I had the power, I would put him there. What do you think?
I think that comes right up to the line. I mean, where
right?
where he says, if I had the opportunity, I would kill the president. That just means the lack of opportunity, which may in fact change. If Woodrow Wilson was going to the town, I think that could actually be perceived as a direct threat on the president's life.
I think there's enough to convict him. I mean, it is, some of it's in the conditional. The President Wilson ought to be killed. I think I could say something like that. Ought to doesn't mean I'm going to do it. I think that first statement was okay. Then he gets closer and closer to the line saying, if I had the opportunity, which you said, someone could get the opportunity. That comes closer to threat. So he was definitely convicted. So
he was prosecuted and convicted.
He was prosecuted and convicted, this guy. So there's been a lot of them, though. I'm going to give you some examples, some highlights, if you will. Okay, so 1971, Groucho Marx said, I think the only hope this country has is Nixon's assassination. Groucho said it. What do you think?
Not a threat. Not a threat. Just a political statement.
Political statement. That's a comedian. 2003, I'm going to give you a famous one. This one I actually saw. There was a political cartoon of George W. Bush being shot. And it was lampooning the famous Vietnam-era picture of the Viet Cong person being shot in the middle of the street, and they put George W. Bush's head on top of it and had someone just shoot him in the head. What do you think?
Not a threat.
Not a threat. This is classic Thomas Nast, famous political cartoon.
Now, one of the things that we've talked about in the newsroom especially is this idea that the actions of an individual can be mimicked by others.
Yes.
So there are other people who might not feel, who have terrific anger towards President Trump, but might not feel any real sort of impetus to go out and act on that anger. But what if they're fans of Snoop Dogg, or what if they look up to Snoop Dogg as someone who might be able to sort of give them, a reason or a motivation to do something? There are also, you're not allowed to incite a riot. You're not allowed to incite somebody to commit an illegal act. Do you think there's any possibility that Snoop could be potentially charged with inciting someone? Let's say there was a copycat and someone did attempt a life on the president in much the same way. I mean, that'd be a gun to the head, I guess.
It's still hard for me to imagine that what Snoop's piece of art, this music video where he's dressing the president up in clown makeup, is enough to incite someone who is of sound mind. Now, sure, there could be some crazies out there who are like, I'm going to go shoot the president because I saw Snoop do it, but that's not the way the law works. If someone makes a separate volitional act off of Snoop's political statement, this doesn't mean that person's at fault. I mean, that's no more than Jodie Foster is at fault for appearing in Taxi Driver and sort of getting in the head of a would-be assassin.
So you're really putting a lot of weight, it sounds like, and I totally agree with you, in this idea that this is a piece of art. A music video is a piece of art. It's artistic expression. Would it be slightly different if he created, just a private citizen created a YouTube video, put the gun to the president's head and pulled it and said, made some sort of comment about this is what I'd like to see happen? That might be different because we do protect art much more than we protect speech that is not entitled as some sort of a political commentary. That speech is truly more menacing, I think, than what happens in a music video.
I agree. If you're Snoop on stage, and this happens sometimes. I think we had I forget the rapper's name, but he said, "Hey, everyone, rush the stage. The cops are up here." He was inciting people to run over barricades,
and that's a clear and immediate danger to the police officers.
You can hold that kind of person liable if you're saying, "Hey, this is a good idea on YouTube with no other artistic merit." It always gets dicey though because people say, "Well, that's my art. I'm being direct."
Yes, that's right.
That's my art. It's very stark.
Yeah, one man's art is another man's political statement.
Exactly.
Right.
So it does get into dangerous territory, but I think there's a distinction that could be made between an artistic expression in Snoop's video and saying, hey, go kill her. If you're my fan, you're my true fan, go kill her.
Snoop is not alone, right, among musicians who have gone after the president. We have another example.
There's a famous example recently. So Madonna, during the Women's March, stood at the podium and said this.
Yes, I have thought an awful lot about blowing up the White House.
So what do you think, Jason? She said she thought an awful lot about blowing up the White House. Is this enough?
Clearly more attenuated than even the Snoop Dogg situation, right? She was sort of indulging in a fantasy that she had to blow up the White House as strange of a fantasy that is.
Right.
But she just merely said that she has thought about it. Now, if you go back to 14th century England, that's clearly a crime,
That's
a crime.
Right. English act of treason.
Right.
You could definitely string up Madonna. The
right.
Material Girl goes up. That's
but we have no such thing, although...
We don't have the Star Chamber anymore or anything like that either.
So putting aside the merits of what she said, that was one of the most grating sort of awful speeches I've ever heard from a celebrity on a political podium like that.
It was. And my favorite part of this is how later she said, what the media picked up was taken wildly out of context.
Derek was railing about this earlier on.
This bothers me so much. This is not out of context. She said, I thought an awful lot about blowing up the White House. If Jason were to say, I'm going to shoot the president, period, yeah, right, and I took out the yeah, right, that would be out of context. That would be deliberately distorting the truth. We just reported on what she said in front of
if Derek would ask me what's the last thing you would do, and I responded, shoot the president, and he said, oh, Jason talked about shooting the president, that would be out of context.
He said it was the last thing he'd like to do. So that's out of context. That always has bothered me when celebrities say things are taken out of context. That's not what happened.
So, Derek, I want to get back to this idea of the Secret Service, because notwithstanding the fact that we agree that what Snoop Dogg did was not illegal, that doesn't mean the Secret Service is going to take it lying down, because they are very concerned about this idea that one person's work of art at one moment may manifest itself later on as something much more serious. And there could be this, especially with somebody as famous as Snoop, and people really do follow him and listen to what he has to say, that he could incite other people to do illegal things. In just a minute, we're going to talk to an expert who's going to tell us exactly what steps the Secret Service is going to take, both with regard to Snoop and possibly with regard to Madonna, even though her statements, I think we agree, were more attenuated.
Yeah, look forward to hearing from
But before we do that, we wanted to have a word from our sponsor, ZipRecruiter.com. If you guys are hiring, there's only one place to go, and that's ZipRecruiter.com. If you need to find the best candidates across the country with a single click of the mouse, you can post your job opening to over 200 websites across the country, including social media sites, which I think is particularly important in this day and age, like Facebook and Twitter. Again, a single click of the mouse, and you're sending it out across the country.
Yeah, and you can go to any industry you want. And really, this is great because the problem is juggling emails and phone calls. I want to use one interface. So ZipRecruiter has a beautifully simple interface. I can quickly screen the candidates. I can rate them. I can hire the right person that I need for the job, and fast. So find out today why it's been used by companies from Fortune 100 companies to small businesses. So head on over to ZipRecruiter.com/TMZ and try it for free.
Just to talk about this for a second, we used to hire people all the time. We still do from time to time, and it was the bane of my existence.
Yeah.
You first had to mail out letters and do it that way or post in newspapers. But then you had this era of the internet where you'd have to, put a job posting on website after website after website, and it is the greatest thing in the world. And now you can go to a single website, type in the information about your job opening, press click, and it is now across the country on under 200 websites.
Whenever you bring
Facebook
this up, though, I think that you wouldn't have hired me. Whenever you bring up how much you wanted to search for other candidates, it makes me feel bad.
We all have our regrets, Derek. Head on over to ZipRecruiter.com/TMZ and try it out for free. All right, so we're really happy to have Ronald Kessler on the line. Ron, thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, great to be with you.
Ronald Kessler is the author of 2 books about the Secret Service. His most recent is First Family Detail, which is now in paperback and available everywhere. Ron, in your expert opinion, the Snoop Dogg video goes up. The Secret Service takes note of it. I think we're all in agreement that there's no illegal act here, but the Secret Service doesn't care that much about that, right? They're more inclined in sort of what the future ramifications of this are?
That's right. But in this case, this is what the Secret Service calls an indirect threat, such as occurred with Snoop Dogg, such as occurred with Madonna, saying she's thought about blowing up the White House. And in those cases, the Secret Service will actually investigate just as if it's a real direct threat. So the Secret Service will show up at that person's house and ask questions. So this is very, very serious.
So Ron, I have a question. Does the seriousness of the offense differ based on the reach of the celebrity? Like, do Madonna and Snoop have a sort of more serious counseling session than a lesser celebrity because they worry about how many people might follow those celebrities?
No, everyone is treated equally as citizens.
What do you expect next in terms of this? I mean, they're going to go to his house. They're going to give him a strict reprimand, a strict warning. Do you expect sort of any public statement by the Secret Service to sort of ward off copycats in this regard?
No, they won't make a public comment, except that they do, when asked by the press, say, we are aware of the situation, which is sort of a code for we're investigating. When there's nothing there, they will not say anything. They just won't have any comment.
Do you think there'd be any grounds here for, additional monitoring after they have this sort of scolding session? Could they run to a court and try to get a warrant for tapping phones of Madonna and Snoop Dogg and things like that? Or
if there's any further indication, for example, they will also interview associates or family members who might know whether this person is serious or not, and whether this person is planning something. And certainly in that case, if they have any hint of actual planning or plotting, they will employ the full reach of the law to investigating. But certainly all of these efforts by the Secret Service to investigate do send a warning signal to these people that they better be careful next time.
Based on your experience, I heard that Derek came up with a statistic that there were 12,000 threats made against President Obama during his 8 years in office. The Secret Service must be chasing their tail like crazy to investigate each one of these. I mean, it must be an incredible physical and financial undertaking.
Yeah, I haven't heard that figure. Typically, there's been about 9 or 10 threats per day against President Obama, even against President Bush. I'm not sure about Donald Trump, but given the passions that he stirs up, I'm sure it's at least that number. Interestingly, though, there has never been, except perhaps in one case, a situation where an actual assassination attempt or an assassination was preceded by a threat.
You took the next question out of my mouth. You said there might be one case. What's the case?
That case was Sarah Jane Moore, who attempted to shoot President Ford.
Yeah.
And in that case, it was a little squishy. She called the San Francisco police the day before and said she's planning to test presidential security when he comes to town, and that she has a gun. And the police showed up and confiscated her gun. The Secret Service interviewed her, determined she wasn't serious, but sure enough, the next day she bought a new gun, and she did try to assassinate him, and the Secret Service intervened and arrested her before she could actually do any harm.
Did she have connections with the Manson family?
Yeah, that's right.
I remember this.
Ronald
This has been
Kessler,
fascinating.
thank you so much. Fascinating discussion. Thanks so much for joining the podcast.
Sure.
Once again, the author of First Family Detail, paperback, available everywhere. Ronald Kessler, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
Jason, that was fascinating.
I love it when somebody comes on, and we talk about this all the time, who knows so much more about a subject than we do. I love getting educated on these things.
I feel like we're punching blind a lot, so it's nice to bring in an expert. Before we leave the subject, I wanted to talk about a lot of these threats come from people of not sound mind. So just to be clear, this is still a felony you have to commit voluntarily. You have to have the sound mind to commit it, and many of these threats come from people who are mentally ill. But it's interesting because if you pose a threat to the president and you're mentally ill, they can actually confine you for much longer than the 5-year sentence that you'd get as a felon, right? I mean, John Hinckley was a threat for 35 years, and he was just only recently released, so he's held in sort of a mental hospital. It's an interesting...
But that was based on the likelihood of recidivism, wasn't it? Or
Exactly.
he would do it again. Yeah.
Exactly. It was based on, but under the code, the 871 provision, it's a 5-year sentence. But he was actually mentally ill, so you can keep them in a hospital until they no longer pose a threat.
Wow.
But if you're of sound mind, you get out after 5 years, you might want to go take another shot at it.
Right.
So it's sort of an interesting paradox.
Oh, what's that sound?
Sounds like mail time.
All right, mail time. Remember to write in your questions and comments to behindthebar@tmz.com.
Parker, I missed you most of all while I was gone. I really did.
Thanks, Jason.
Thank you.
By like 2-1 over anybody else.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
First one up is from Devin. Kellyanne Conway recently insinuated that Obama could be spying on people through their microwaves. Obviously, this is incorrect, and she later attempted to walk back her statements, but it got me thinking. There have been a lot of straight-up lies that have been told recently in the government, and since some of these people hold official positions of power, when does it become illegal?
That's a good question.
Lies are never illegal.
Unless they harm.
Unless they harm. Typically, the most obvious case is when they're used to defraud somebody out of money. Lies can be actionable, right?
Yeah.
You can defame somebody.
Sure.
I have thought a little bit about President Obama, whether he could bring a lawsuit against President Trump because of President Trump's apparently completely false statements that Obama had led a wiretapping effort on
That's
his
interesting.
phones.
What would stop him? Because this is certainly injurious to his reputation as a law-abiding, effective executive.
Right, and there's a couple things just to be aware of. When somebody makes a statement in their official capacity as for example a senator on the Senate floor, a House member on the House floor, or the president from the Oval Office, they enjoy what's called immunity from civil lawsuits. So somebody could get up on the Senate floor and say anything about anybody. Somebody could call somebody a pedophile from the Senate floor with knowing that it's not true, and they're completely immune from prosecution. But there's no such laws with regard to offhand comments made by the president. The president is immune from a lot of criminal penalties, but not civil penalties. And I do think, although it would be unseemly and Obama would never do it, that he could probably maintain a lawsuit against the Trump administration.
He might be able to. One problem with it, though, is I don't think Trump is sort of has a reckless disregard for the truth. I'm not sure that he's putting his head in the sand and ignoring contrary facts so much as he's just being a shoot from the hip, loose kind of speaker. And I think because they're both public figures, I think Obama would have to say you're either being malicious or you're recklessly disregarding the truth.
I agree with that with regard to Trump's first statement, but he followed up and he doubled down continuously, and he continued to assert that he had this evidence and would release it. And I think by the time he made those comments, he knew he didn't have the evidence. So it's those subsequent comments that I think could theoretically get him in hot water with regard to President Obama. But Obama's not going to sue.
Can we take a step back and say how crazy it is that the current president is maligning the character in such an open and obvious way of the the president who just exited office? I just think it's staggering where we are, and our barometer has changed.
I think that you and I have attempted not to take sides in this podcast, take sides against the president of the United States or in favor of the president of the United States, this current president. But this one, to me, was really unseemly. Yeah. It was a comment that apparently lacks any foundation. He said he was going to bring foundation for it, and he hasn't. And
it's just breathtaking.
And it's
this is
breathtaking
not
that
the decorum of the greatest office.
Putting
in the
aside
land.
the decorum of the office, how do you when somebody tells what has now been disproven as a complete falsity, how do you take the next thing and give it credence as potentially true? And I think that really does undermine the office of the presidency, and I'm really I'm concerned about that.
Sure.
All right, next one up is from Daniel. Rachel Maddow released a portion of Trump's tax returns from 2005 on Tuesday night. Aren't these private documents? How is she allowed to do this?
Oh, good question. So the Trump administration, in advance of Maddow's leak, which turned out to be a big thud and big fizzle out.
It really was. I think it played into Trump's hand. It really does. Made him look like a rich man who pays some taxes.
But he said that it's illegal to steal tax returns and it's illegal to publish tax returns. The first is undoubtedly true, and the second is undoubtedly false, right?
Absolutely. So look, Rachel Maddow is a journalist. So if someone stole Trump's tax documents and said, hey, I've got these things, and didn't tell Rachel Maddow that I stole them, just I've come into possession of something that is highly relevant to the political climate and says, would you like these? Rachel Maddow can absolutely publish that. She is a news person. She has done nothing wrong. She didn't ask the person to steal the documents. She can't encourage that in any way. But if she just comes into possession of very relevant documents, she can absolutely go out and
there's a very famous Supreme Court case called the Bart Nikki case that we're all well familiar of, and you sort of learn it, Bart Nikki v. Vopper. And in that case, what the Supreme Court said is that if a media organization obtains a document lawfully, meaning the media organization didn't commit the actual theft of the document or did not and otherwise encourage the theft of the document prior to its happening. So go steal this document and we'll pay you or something like that. Mm-hmm. If they obtained it lawfully after any illegal act took place, they can publish it without any fear of prosecution or civil liability whatsoever. And it's an absolute bar against prosecution or civil liability, number one, and it's, number two, an essential bar. We go back to the Pentagon Papers.
Critical to the free press.
The Pentagon Papers are the most famous example of this, where during the Nixon administration there were these papers that really commented on the illegality or legality of the actions of the president.
Now, we have to emphasize that the person who got those documents, if they broke into Donald Trump's house and stole his tax returns, that person can get in trouble.
Oh, whoever leaked Trump's tax
trouble.
returns and apparently mailed them to the New York Times reporter,
a huge risk.
committed an illegal act. There's no question about that because they obtained them unlawfully. But then once they end up in the media's hands, much like the Pentagon Papers, you have there is a First Amendment right. It's an essential right of the media to be able to publish that. Can you imagine if the media had to worry about where leaks came from? We couldn't publish any leak because at some point there's a breach of a contractual relationship. There's an illegal act that got you the information in the first place and allow you to disclose it. The media just can't be curtailed. They can't be handcuffed like that. You find it, you get to publish it, and that's the end of the story.
And moreover, she probably won't have to give up the source of this, right?
No, absolutely not.
I mean, this is essential to getting information, is sometimes preserving the confidentiality, and subpoenaing her to give up whoever gave this to her would be a very difficult task.
It absolutely would, right.
Last one is from Carly. A little bit off topic, but you guys often talk with authority about several different areas of the law. But are there any sections of the law that you two have a hard time understanding, or is it more or less equally challenging?
There are as many that we have a hard time understanding as there are that we have a command of.
Yeah. No, I mean, Derek and I both, we were in private practice for a long time. Derek was largely a bankruptcy lawyer. I was a business litigator, and so we pick up expertise or some level of knowledge over those areas of the law.
We've had to learn a lot about the First Amendment to do this job.
We also went to law school, so we have a more broad-based knowledge, but we've forgotten most of that. And we took the bar exam, but we've forgotten most of that. And in this job, right, a lot of First Amendment law, a lot of copyright law, and those sorts of things. Plus, we learn a lot in the stories we publish. I didn't know anything about sort of criminal procedure, but now with this job, having done this for 8 years, you learn a lot because a lot of things we covered are about the trial of Michael Jackson, for example. You learn a lot about criminal procgive But
if you really want to stump me,
ask me
send
a
in an
question.
arcane trusts and estates question.
I was going to go with trust and estates. Give me a patent law question. Give me something, employment law. I don't really have a firm grasp of employment law. There's a lot of areas of law that I have had no real exposure to. You sort of, the law is kind of a logical thing. You sort of pick things up as you go along, and nothing really, you're never really wrong about anything, but you have to throw up your hands sometimes and say, boy, oh boy, if so-and-so dies and they have 3 sons, but one of the sons has died, and the person put in that the money should cheat to the state if one of the sons dies, where does it actually go, and what are the rights of the trustees versus the beneficiaries? I'm going to tell you, I don't know.
We could wallow in the quagmire of a lot of areas of the law, but criminal stuff, which neither of us practiced, we actually learn a lot on the job.
Yeah.
A lot of stuff comes up here, DUIs and things like that, things that I never knew about when I practiced.
Right.
I'm fairly well versed now, at least on the California
Right, and
side.
we didn't go to law school. You learn that stuff in law school, but in one ear and out the other. Am I right about that?
Exactly.
All right, that is it for Mail Time.
Good questions. Thank you guys so
Those are
much.
great.
All right, once again, we are sponsored by ZipRecruiter.com, where with a single click of the mouse, you can publish your job postings to over 200 websites across the country, including social media sites like Facebook and Twitter.
That's exactly right. So head on over to ZipRecruiter.com/TMZ. One more time, that's ZipRecruiter.com/TMZ, and you can try it for free.
See you guys next week. Thanks for watching. If you want more nerdy deep dives into the legal side of celebrity news, hit our subscribe button right here.
And check out our previous episode over here.